Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to another evening for Politics in the Pub. Before anything, I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on traditional lands of the Cadigal people of the Eora Nation, and let us pay our respects to elders both past and present. But tonight also I'd like to break the news about the untimely passage of Muhammad Abdul Aziz. Some of you may know, have heard of him. He was the third Secretary General to the Polisario Front and the second president of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic since its inaugural, when Polisario leader El Wali Mustafa Sayed died in action in 1976 until his death. His funeral on the 3rd of June was held in the Sahrawi refugee camps and was attended by high-level delegations from the African unions and the developing nations that continue to struggle for freedom. On Saturday, the 4th of June, his body was taken for burial at the Bir Lalu in the liberated zone of Western Sahara. Many around the world will share the sadness of the Sahrawi at the death of President Abdulaziz, whose determination to achieve justice for his people through international law and diplomacy contrasts starkly with the violence witnessed in other conflicts in the region. His vision of an independent Western Sahara lives on, and it must now be realized by a new generation. So let us have a moment of silence in solemn remembrance of a great soul. Our topic is a very lengthy one. Western Sahara, the last colony in Africa whose people endure extreme suffering, new hope that they will at last get an independence referendum through the UN. And we are fortunate to have two speakers tonight on the topic who speaks not just from study but from experience. Our first speaker is Kamal Fadel. He has a background in international relations and has been admitted as a lawyer in Australia. Mr. Fadel is Western Sahara representative to Australia and former ambassador to East Timor. He has served in India, Iran, and the UK as a Sahrawi diplomat. Mr. Fadel is also involved with the Sahrawi Republic Petroleum and Mining Authority and is responsible for the coordination of SADR relationships with oil and mining companies. Our second speaker is Professor Damien Kingsbury, a director of the MICD, a position he held since 2007. He holds a personal chair in the Faculty of Arts and Education and was appointed as Professor of International Politics, Chair in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Damien is active in academic NGO circles and in the field here and in the developing world, and is a regular national and international media commentator on international affairs. Among Damien's works are 24 books on his experiences in Western Sahara, Sri Lanka, East Timor-Leste, and his most recent book is scheduled for publication by Routledge on Southeast Asia, Authority, Democracy, and Political Change. So without much further ado, I'll give the stage to our first speaker, Mr. Kamal Fadel.
Well, thank you very much, Geoffrey, and thank you, the Committee for the Politics in the Pub, for organizing this event on Western Sahara. I think it has been many years since this issue has been tackled by Politics in the Pub, so it is very timely. Thank you all for coming here tonight to hear about the issue of Western Sahara. But first of all, let me just pay tribute to the leader of the Polisario, the independence movement, and president of the Sahrawi Republic, Muhammad Abdul, who passed away about 2 weeks ago, as Geoffrey mentioned earlier. It's a big loss for the people of Western Sahara because Abdulaziz has been one of the founding members of the Polisario in 1973 and has been the leader of the movement since the first leader, Al-Wali Mustafa Said, died in the war in 1976. So, and Abdulaziz was a very committed Sahrawi for the independence of Western Sahara. He has contributed a great deal, not only during the war as a military leader, but also during the years of peace, during the last 25 years. And he has his achievements in terms of building the basis for an independent Western Sahara, the institutions of the state are very significant. So it is a big loss, and the Sahrawis are mourning his passing away. But also they have expressed their commitment and determination to continue on the same path that Abdulaziz has set forth for the Sahrawi people. So thank you very much for the minute of silence earlier and for acknowledging this important event. But I thought my contribution tonight would be in setting the historical background, because I'm sure quite a few people here are not very familiar with the issue. And hopefully Damien would fill in the gaps and talk about recent events and probably comparison with East Timor, which he is very familiar with the two issues. And Damien has also been recently to the refugee camps and has experienced events on the ground. But, you know, Western Sahara is very similar to East Timor. There are so many parallels. It was invaded and occupied by Morocco in 1975. But the territory itself is the size of Great Britain, and it is located on the Atlantic coast in Northwest Africa between Mauritania and Morocco. It was inhabited by the indigenous Sahrawis for centuries, who are a mixture of African, Berber, and Arab descent. The Sahrawis had their own system of government in Western Sahara called the 8 Arba'in, which is the Council of 40 that decided on war and peace. And the people of Western Sahara had a long history of resistance to attempts of outsiders to occupy their own homeland. But during the Berlin Conference of 1884, in which the European colonial powers divided Africa in what was known at that time the Scramble for Africa, Western Sahara was given to Spain. But the Spanish were unable to control the territory because of the resistance of the indigenous population until 1934, when they joined forces with France in neighboring Mauritania and Algeria and Morocco to what they called at that time pacify the population. That means to, you know, combine forces to crush the resistance. In 1957, inspired by the liberation movements in neighboring countries and in Africa and in Latin America and in Asia, the Sahrawis set up what they called the Liberation Army, which started to attack not only the Spanish but also the French in neighboring countries in order to push them to speed the process of decolonization of the territory. But again, the Spanish and French forces combined their efforts and crushed the resistance in what was called at that time Operation Equivillon, with the tacit support of Morocco. So that resistance was short-lived, but in 1963, the UN put Western Sahara on its list of non-self-governing territories. And of course, all non-self-governing territories are entitled, their people are entitled to the right to self-determination and independence in accordance with the international law and UN Charter and many resolutions which called for the end of colonialism at that time. And in 1965, the UN called on Spain to start the process of decolonization of the territory. But that call went unheard, and the Spanish did not do that. So a Sahrawi intellectual and leader called Muhammad Sid Ibrahim Basiri, who was studying overseas, particularly in Syria, I think, and Egypt, came back to the territory inspired with the thoughts of independence and nationalism, and he set up an organization in the late 70s, I think in 1967, which was called the Liberation Movement, or the Harakat Tahrir, Saqi al-Hamra and Rio Doro. But it adopted peaceful means, of course inspired by the famous Indian leader Gandhi, and wanted to have change in a peaceful and democratic way. But because of the ruthless colonial rule imposed by Franco in Spain at that time, the movement remained clandestine. But in 1970, on the 17th of June, that is the anniversary is tomorrow, in 1970, they started a peaceful uprising called the Simla Uprising in a town in the capital of Western Sahara called, in a neighborhood called Simla. And that was also suppressed by the Spanish, and the leader of the movement was arrested and he disappeared. His fate is still unknown until today. So that peaceful resistance also failed. The Sahrawi students who were studying abroad, particularly in Morocco, which is the irony here, started to think about how they can liberate Western Sahara, and started meeting and discussing. And on the 10th of May, 1973, they established the Polisario Front, which is an independence movement, but unlike the Harakat Tahrir, it adopted armed struggle as a means of achieving independence. And on the 20th of May, 1973, they launched their first operation against the Spanish garrison at a place called Khanga. Because of the international pressure and the decolonization process that was taking place in Africa and elsewhere, and because of the pressure from the United Nations and the internal pressure from the local population, the Spanish started to realize that their time is up. And they, in fact, informed the United Nations that they would start the process of decolonization, I think, mainly in 1974. At that time, the two neighboring countries, Morocco and Mauritania, started claiming sovereignty over the territory. And they said Spain cannot give independence to the Sahrawis, but it should, in fact, give the territory back to us, that is Morocco and Mauritania. And they sought an opinion from the International Court of Justice through the UN. And the question that was put to the International Court of Justice was in two folds. One, was Western Sahara terra nullius before the Spanish arrived? And if it was not, did Morocco or Mauritania have any sovereign title over this territory? And the International Court of Justice heard presentations by Morocco, Mauritania, Spain, but the Sahrawi indigenous people were not present because the court only hears from states. But what the UN did just also at the same time, they sent a fact-finding mission to the territory to find out what is happening there, what is the aspirations of the indigenous population. And the fact-finding mission published a report on the 14th of October, 1975, in which it stated that the overwhelming population wanted independence, and that there was a movement which was very popular called the Polisario. Following that, the International Court of Justice on the 16th of October, 1975, published its opinion on Western Sahara. And it stated, and I quote, "The court's conclusion is that the material and information presented to it do not establish any tie of territorial sovereignty between the territory of Western Sahara and the Kingdom of Morocco or the Mauritanian entity. Thus, the court has not found legal ties of such a nature as might affect the application of Resolution 1514 in the decolonization of Western Sahara, and in particular of the principle of self-determination through the free and genuine expression of the will of the peoples of the territory." So that was very clear, that neither Morocco nor Mauritania had any sovereign title over the territory, and that its people were entitled to the right to self-determination. But few hours later, the King of Morocco announced to his people that the court decision was in our favor, and we are going to march towards Western Sahara to take the territory back to Morocco. And this was, of course, being organized behind the scenes. 350,000 Moroccans marched in what was called the Green March. But at the same time, the army moved in. The cameras and the media saw only the civilian population that was walking, but the army was invading at the same time. And Security Council issued a resolution asking Morocco to stop the march and to withdraw any people who went to West Sahara, but Morocco ignored that, because at that time, as you would remember, it was the height of the Cold War, and Morocco had very good friends in the Security Council and at the UN, particularly the United States and France, who Morocco was very close to them at that time. So the invasion took place. It was very bloody and brutal. And the Sahrawis had to face two armies, one coming from the north and one from the south, with rudimentary arms, with very little means, with disorganized and unprepared. But the Sahrawis fought very well and were able to defeat Mauritania in 1979. And Mauritania signed the peace treaty with the people of Western Sahara and withdraw from the part it occupied. I have to mention that earlier in November 1975, Mauritania, Morocco, and Spain signed an agreement in Madrid in which Western Sahara was divided. One part was given to Mauritania and one part was given to Morocco, and Spain kept economic interest in the territory. The war continued until the late 1980s, when Morocco was really finding it very difficult and sought the assistance of other countries to advise them what they could do, and the advice was to build a wall, a berm. That was a sand wall, 3 to 5 meters high, with barbed wire, with rocks, mines. I think the estimate's between 5 and 10 million mines, dogs, radars, trenches, and it's 2,400 kilometers. It stretches from the south of Morocco to the limits on the of Western Sahara on the Atlantic coast in the south, next to Mauritania. But soon they realized that this wall was a white elephant, because it was costing about $2 to $3 million on a daily basis to maintain. It had the estimates of 140,000 soldiers behind it. And the Sahrawis had the initiative. They adopted the guerrilla war. They could attack at any time, anywhere they wanted. And they were fighting for a cause they believed in. The Moroccan army, which came from Morocco, from the north, they are not used to the desert. They are fighting a foreign war, and they don't believe in it. So they were not fighting very well. So it was costing Morocco a lot, and they decided to opt for a peaceful resolution. Or it was a very cunning move by the late King Hassan II of Morocco. He said, okay, we'll accept this, the peace plan proposed by the African OAU at that time, African Organization for African Unity, which became now AU, African Union, and the UN. It was a joint proposal. It was based on a ceasefire, the organization of a referendum of self-determination, in which the people would vote for either independence or integration within Morocco. But the intention of Morocco was not to go ahead to the referendum, because they knew very well that the Sahrawis would vote for independence. It was a delaying tactic. Ceasefire was declared on the 6th of September 1991, but no referendum until now. There is a mission of UN called MINURSO in the territory, but that mission is very much useless at the moment, particularly since March this year, because Morocco ordered most of the civilian component, or except 2 people, I think, to leave the territory. It was a reaction to the visit of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, to the territory in March, where he said that Western Sahara was occupied, and they didn't like that word, occupied. Although it is not the first time that word was used by the United Nations. It has been used many times before, particularly in United Nations resolutions. So what we find ourselves here now facing is a kind of a stalemate, a failure of the United Nations to achieve peace in Western Sahara and to accomplish the colonization of the territory in accordance with the UN Charter and resolutions. And while we have a terrible situation that these people are facing, the Sahrawi people, not only in the occupied territories, but in the refugee camps, where 165,000 Sahrawis live in dire conditions, in very hostile environment, where it's very cold in winter, very hot in summer, and there can basically nothing in the desert. No one lived there before, but the people want to stay there until there is a resolution to go back home. Some of them have left family members and homes in Western Sahara, the occupied areas. While on the other side, there is a terrible situation of human rights abuses and exploitation of resources. I might let Damien talk about those areas, but I try to conclude that at the moment we find that Morocco is very isolated internationally. It is in conflict with the United Nations because it has expelled most of the UN mission in Western Sahara. They have criticized very harshly the UN Secretary General for things nothing. They are in conflict with the European Union because of the decision of the European Court of Justice that it annulled the contract between the EU and Morocco, found it illegal in terms of the areas which concern Western Sahara, the EU-Morocco agricultural agreement, and they are in conflict with the African Union because of its position on Western Sahara. They have failed to win the hearts and minds of the indigenous Sahrawis in the occupied territories, who continue through peaceful means to demand their right to self-determination and independence. So that is where we are now, but we are at a situation which is also very critical. The Sahrawis have been very frustrated, disappointed with the international community and the United Nations because of the failure of the UN and the inability of the UN to deliver the referendum they promised 25 years ago to the Sahrawis. And the referendum is based on a principle of self-determination, which is a cornerstone of international relations and international law and UN resolutions. That failure of the UN in Western Sahara would be really bad and would be unprecedented and could lead to resumption of hostilities and instability in the region and more disturbance, which we hope to avoid. Thank you.